This is a training film or movie on the new development in NeuroGuide with the NeuroNavigator and the ability to now look at the sources and the connectivity of the cerebellum, the red nucleus, the abinula, the subthalamus. And we've already had the thalamus in the previous release, but this is a pre-release version of 3.0.6.3 that allows us to import research data to evaluate the cerebellum. This is the demo patient who was struck in the right parietal lobe and is paralyzed on the left and has spatial neglect, does not see things in the left part of the visual world, does not shave the left side of his face, does not write on the left side of paper. And so we're evaluating the right parietal lobe issues. I opened up the NeuroGuide demo. I'm going to move it over here to 0. We're not going to go through all the details of how to import EEG or how to edit. That can be, and that's in other videos. Generally, it's file open, and then we can open up any of these amplifiers. And this is actually a lexicor file of a patient, the patient that I just described. Now, I've edited it to using automatic editing so that we got 1 minute and 59 seconds. I got the start time at 0, and I got 2 seconds of data. 2 minutes of data, roughly 1 minute 59 seconds. And typically, what you do that is to evaluate or try to link the patient's symptoms to the deviations from normal. In this case, it's the right parietal lobe. If you look on the left, you'll see that it's 3 or 4 standard deviations outside of normal in the areas that have been injured. Now, what we're focusing on here today is the NeuroNavigator. To activate that, I'm going to click Analysis, NeuroNavigator, and I'm going to click Generate New Research Data. This is new to this particular build of 3.0.6.3. I've already done it to save time. And so I'm going to minimize the NeuroGuide and just work now with the Navigator. And I'm going to maximize the Navigator. This is the way the Navigator looks, at least in mine, as a default when it comes up. This is the connectome on the right. We're going to focus for now just on the volume itself. And so I'm going to go to Volume View. And whatever settings you have here right now, when you open up the Navigator in the future, it will retain these settings. So I have these settings for now, and I'm going to get rid of the connectome by clicking the little arrow there under Volume View, and goodbye. This is the Navigator in which all the Brahman areas have been selected. And so we're just going to work only with the cerebellum and the sensory-motor cortex. But at 5 cycles per second, that was when the greatest deviation from normal was. So I'm going to type in 5 for frequency. This is raw scores. These are not, and the current density values are shown down here. This is not z-scores. I've selected coherence in the past, so that's why it's lit up. If I click connectivity and then get rid of functional connectivity, then you'll see all of the bars are gone. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. And up here, I'm going to sort. I'm going to click on number. So I sort the Brahman areas 1 through 9. I'm going to right mouse click here, and I'm going to disable all of them. So all these boxes now are free. So I'm going to select the motor cortex first. And I might as well activate the connectivity so you can see how it starts going. I'm going to click show, which means it's going to be showing coherence, and in a minute we'll adjust that. So I'm going to get Brahman areas 1 and 2, both left and right hemisphere. Here's 1 and 2, and 3. That's the sensory-motor cortex. This is Brahman area 4 is the motor cortex. Brahman area 5 is the parietal lobes. For now, we'll just look at them. And I'm going to get rid of the cortex so we can see this. And you can see, and to get a view of where this is in the brain, I'll bring in the head model, and I'm going to move it down. You can make any of these views more or less transparent. So you just click the little arrow to do that and make it fairly transparent. And we'll be getting rid of it anyway. Here's the right parietal lobe region, which has been damaged. This is the sensory-motor cortex. You can see an asymmetry already. Now I'm going to select the cerebellum and the regions of the brain that the physical therapist is particularly interested in. So I'm going all the way down. There's Brobinary 48. I'm going to select the left and right thalamus because we're going to look at how and I'll get rid of the cortex, the head model so we can see it more clearly, how the cerebellum communicates to the motor cortex through the thalamus. So this is cerebellum crus 1, crus 2, left and right, lobules. There's 3, 4, 5, 6 cerebellum, and 7B. This is from the Human Brain Mapping Program, Montreal Neurological Institute, the National Institutes of Health. And so we're using their template. And those are the only particular cerebellar hubs that are available. Now I'm down to Brobinaria 10. Now I'm in the vermis 1 and 2. That's the anterior vermis, now the middle vermis, and now I'm getting close to the posterior vermis. And the peduncular region is vermis 9 and 10, I believe. We're not going to look at the habenula for the moment, but we will look at the subthalamus. And now we have the full complement of, and with a mouse wheel, you can expand this, of the cerebellar connections through the thalamus to the motor cortex up here. And one thing you can see is that the coherence, which is, you can see the scale here, is reasonably high in these local regions, both in the brainstem and cerebellum and in the motor cortex. So there's a local hypercoherence, not hyper, but high levels of coherence locally, but it's blue. The long distance connections are blue. So this is a general property of the brain. It's called the small world model. Most of the processing in the brain happens in local groups, in hubs, of networks. And then the brain minimizes the expense of long-distance communication to the extent it can. But this immediately illustrates the local versus long-distance small world model of connectivity in the brain. Now, this is the thalamus. And so you can see, and I'm going to get rid of the axial slice here. You can see the hub of the thalamus connecting to the motor cortex bilaterally. There's not a lot of communication interhemispherically, but there is fairly high communication locally in the sensory-motor cortex. There's also a fair amount of communication in the cerebellum and certainly in the thalamus. And you can verify which regions you're looking at by deselecting them. For example, I'm going to deselect let's deselect the subthalamus first to see where it is. So there's the subthalamus. And I'm going to go up to the thalamus. So you can see, if you want, you can eliminate everything and just look at the thalamus. We can do that in a minute, and the subthalamus. So you can see where these connections are, where the local connections are. Here's the red nucleus. I forgot to select that. The red nucleus is very important. It is the relay brainstem nucleus. It goes to the subthalamus and thalamus and then to the somatosensory cortex. So the cerebellum communicates through the dentate nucleus and its deep nuclei to the red nucleus. Red nucleus communicates with the spinal cord and brainstem, as well as rostral to the thalamus and then relayed to the somatosensory cortex up here. So let's take a look at the cortex. And I'm going to reduce increase its transparency so we can see it better. I'm going to add the head model. And then you can use your arrow key to turn this around and show it to people. Gives you a perspective of where these hubs are in the cerebellum. I'm going to add the slice. That helps give you a view now of, and you have to move this around, get used to doing that. I can move this slice up and down so you can see where his pathology is, which is right up here. The right parietal lobe is where he was injured. I can make the cortex less transparent. Oops. So one can see the current density change, very big asymmetry because the right parietal region has been damaged. So these are the kinds of tools, I'm going to make it more transparent, that can be played with. And so we can explore the cerebellar somatosensory cortex, motor and sensory cortex, which is very important for patients with balance problems as well as Parkinson's. It's been shown that in Parkinson's patients, one can reduce the severity of the symptoms by training the cerebellar circuits, which are exactly what I'm looking at here. Now I'm going to get rid of the head model and get rid of the cortex so we can explore these a little bit more. First thing I'm going to do is deselect the motor cortex. I'll get rid of the slice. So you can play around with these things and watch how they change. Okay, now we're just looking at the local brainstem area. And we can also now look at, when we click connectivity, we can look at diffusion tensor imaging. And inside there is the connectivities. We can make the transparency greater or maximum. The color controls don't always work like they should. But there's actually quite a symmetry if we have the right cerebellum. This is the connectivity of the cerebellum through diffusion tensor imaging. On the right versus the left, it's much higher. The red is higher coherence. So I'm going to get rid of the diffusion tensor imaging so we can just see the connectivity there. Now that's the connectivity of the cerebellum, the vermis, the red nucleus, the subthalamus, the thalamus by itself without the cortex involved. That's coherence. Coherence is the degree of correlation or how well they communicate, these hubs. And I'm going to click on center voxel. That allows one to see where things are. If you move your mouse over the center voxel and right mouse click, that shows you that cerebellum crus 1 right. That's thalamus right. Subthalamus left. Subthalamus right. So that allows you to identify what's happening here. And at least where the hubs are. It helps, of course, to have a cortical view so that you can see where things are with respect to the brain. And the future physical therapists are going to be working, they already do, with cognition, in which now the connection between the deeper structures and the forebrain can be evaluated. I'm going now through Brovin areas 1 through 4, bringing them back to show, again, I'm going to go to 5 cycles per second up here, the connectivity, and put in a slice, move the slice down, as a training film, people should just play around with these controls and see what's happening. As far as cognition goes, we have the full 88 Bravin areas here. Things, with the parietal lobes, the temporal lobes, the various parts of the frontal lobes. Here's the insula, Bravin area 13. I'm going to get rid of this slice so you can, if you want to see how. Here's the insula interacting with the cerebellum. Get rid of the cortex. There's the insula. I get rid of the left insula, right insula. Here's put the insula back in. Let's go down and add the amygdala. There's left amygdala, right amygdala. Amygdala is pretty close to the insula, so you don't see a lot of separation, but they're in different locations. And so that is this is one. Well, I'm not done yet. I want to show the rest. Here's lag coherence. And you can change the sensitivity. Lag coherence means there is no zero phase lag. And here's phase delays. That's in degrees. See degrees down here. That's the time it takes to go from each of these hubs to other hubs. You can see it takes more time to go between hemispheres. In the cerebellum, it's very short delays. There's longer delays in the communication between the cerebellar hubs and the motor cortex. And then this is information flow. This is the magnitude and direction. Well, right now, it's just the magnitude of information flow. And you can see there's a lot of information flow from the cerebellum to the motor cortex, and actually more information flow from the cerebellar nuclei and the motor cortex than there is interhemispherically, or between the nodes of the motor cortex. But you can see the motor cortex is communicating with the insula. Insula is very important. It's involved in cognition, but that's much stronger communication on the left than the right. You can see that asymmetry in information flow, much more information flow on the right. I'm sorry, the left than the right, because of the injury to this individual. So this is the right, and there's the left. So it helps to bring the head in to get your orientation correct. And so this is a brief tutorial. You can evaluate also the cerebellum itself. I'm going to, and by clicking DTI, I mean the diffusion tensor imaging of the cerebellum, I'm going to right mouse click and hide all. And then I'm going to go down and select. Well, first of all, we can spread this out a bit so we can get our groupings. Here's different groupings. I'm going to select now the superior peduncle, the vermis, the middle cerebral peduncle, left cerebellum, inferior cerebellar peduncle, right cerebellum. These are diffusion tensor imaging. I'm now going to deselect the functional connectivity, so it's gone. I'm going to select the cerebellum that I just selected over here. This is the diffusion tensor imaging of the cerebellar peduncles. I can click full screen, so now you can just look at this particular view. I'm going to get rid of the center voxels, and you can get another view of the brain. Put the axial slice in. You can sort of see the applied neuroscience is working primarily with this upper part of the sphere, and the American Balance Institute is working more with the lower region. So we're coming together as two expert entities to help people with balance problems and cognition problems with Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury, and pain. We can look at the pain network in a minute. in which whatever the vertical and dimension is from the older brain, which is the lower part here, versus the more evolved, later phylogenetically more recent part. Today, now we can look at both halves of the sphere, the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. And this is one tool that allows us to do a lot of things. Number one, to evaluate a patient by evaluating their symptoms, the severity of their symptoms, the nature of their symptoms, and then looking at and linking those symptoms to deviation from normal in the networks of the brain and the hubs of the brain that are known to be related to those symptoms. We're going to be computing normative data on over 700 healthy individuals from birth to 82 years of age, and doing a number of different studies on these individuals. So that's it for now, and hopefully it'll get you individuals started and playing around with all of these fascinating toys and images. This is a two-dimensional view of the three-dimensional functional connectivity. And the Brodmann area numbers are shown up there. The cerebellum is down in the lower part. The frontal lobes are up here. Here's the insula. And then these are the various parts of the cerebellum and the motor cortex being connected in the two-dimensional world. So thank you for watching.